Big Ten showdown in Indianapolis, Ohio State, Michigan State. Mark Rogers TV here to break down the big matchup that will send one team most likely to the Rose Bowl, and if it's Ohio State, the winner, possibly to the BCS National Championship game. The Buckeyes coming in with a 24-game winning streak at 12-0 this season. Michigan State, after a loss to Notre Dame, going undefeated in Big Ten play at 8-0. The Spartans come in at 11-1. What a showdown between the offense of Ohio State and that Spartan defense, ranked number one in total defense, rushing defense, and fourth in the country in scoring defense, giving up just under 12 points per ball game, giving up just 237 yards per game. Ohio State, the offense is the best in the Big Ten by far. It's not even close. One of the top 5 or 6 offenses in college football, averaging 48 points per game, 531 yards per game. That scoring average is third best in college football. All right, let's track this one down, looking at the Ohio State offense against the Michigan State defense. Strength against strength first, then we'll look at the other side of the line of scrimmage. Urban Meyer said about this defense this week, it's as good as a defense as I've seen. We know that Urban Meyer coached at Florida against a lot of amazing defenses in the SEC. All right, Ohio State in facing 2 top 10 defenses in college football. Wisconsin 6th ranked right now, and Iowa 9th ranked, racked up 390 yards and 31 points against Wisconsin, 34 points and 495 yards against the Hawkeyes of Iowa. This defense is better than those two, but certainly Wisconsin and Iowa were severe tests for the Buckeyes, and Ohio State had 2 dog fights on their hands, both games in Columbus. This one, of course, neutral site in Indianapolis. Ohio State racked up 393 rushing yards against Michigan last week, a Wolverine defense that is probably underrated, giving up just 116 rushing yards per game. And think about how many times with Michigan's struggling offense has that offense put Michigan in bad field position all year. The Michigan defense is pretty good. And again, giving up 116 on the ground per game, and Ohio State hit them up for 393. Braxton Miller threw it just 15 times against the Wolverines as Carlos Hyde tore up the Michigan's defense last week in Ann Arbor. 27 carries, 226 yards. This Ohio State rushing offense has risen through the ranks since Carlos Hyde first came off of that 3-game suspension, then got his sea legs, and the Buckeye rushing attack second in the nation at 321 yards per game, facing the best rushing defense in college football. Of course, as they say, it's a cliche, but something has to give. Max Bullough is the centerpiece of that defense against the run. 73 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss. He is a throwback football player, a Chris Spielman sort if you're a Big Ten fan. Michigan State has given up 0 touchdowns in 5 of the past 6 games. Certainly, they have not faced an offense like the Ohio State Buckeyes. I believe that the difference that Ohio State could make in moving the football and scoring points and getting explosive plays against the Spartan defense. Keep in mind that Michigan State, in racking up these incredible defensive stats, yes, they're legitimate, they're credible stats, but they did not face the best offenses in the Big Ten. Wisconsin, Nebraska, and certainly did not face Ohio State in the regular season. So that somewhat taints the field. In place of those games, they took on the likes of Purdue and Indiana, although the Hoosiers do have a fine offense and scoring 28 points, the most Michigan State gave up in 2013. But these could be the playmakers that make a difference in this football game. Philly Brown, a clutch receiver, a guy who knows positioning, knows how to find spots, and knows how to set up the defensive back. 50 receptions, 9 touchdowns for Philly Brown. Does not have lightning speed, but he is a great possession receiver, a guy that works the slot at times. They move him all over the place. You've got Devin Smith. He's more of the downfield guy that scored the Buckeyes' first touchdown against Michigan, like a 55-yard scoring play from Braxton Miller. 50 receptions or 41 for Devin Smith and 8 touchdowns. Jeff Hireman, one of the best pass-catching tight ends in the Big Ten and one of the best blocking tight ends in the Big Ten. We will see him in the NFL. Jeff Hireman caught 24 so far this year and 3 touchdowns. Okay, the X factor in this football game for Ohio State on offense is Trae Wilson. He was thrown out of the game. He's just a little guy, just a speed guy, a freshman, the fastest guy on this field in Indianapolis. but he was thrown out for throwing punches in that game against Michigan in the big brawl in the first half. He's back for the Big Ten championship game. He was used sparingly by Urban Meyer this season, mostly because he's not a threat blocking, cannot protect the passer, and it's a bit obvious when he comes into the game that he's either going to be a flat-out decoy or he's going to get the football in his hands. He did 21 times through pass receptions. They're not going to run him. He had fumbling issues, and they're not going to test and waste a carry that could wind up on the carpet against Michigan State. So Dontre Wilson's going to have to carry the football in future years for the Buckeyes. It's going to be all Carlos Hyde out of the backfield and Braxton Miller, of course, keeping on the read option. But Dontre Wilson, X factor, mark it down right now, 21 receptions this year. And we're talking X factor in getting like 4 or 5 touches max. But they could be electric plays because Michigan State has not faced a player this fast this season. Michigan State defensively is amazing. Denicos Allen, an Ohio native who really wants to put one on the Buckeyes. 83 stops for the Spartans. That led the team. He had 15 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks this season. Shiloque Calhoun, the defensive end, who started to show us his promise last season in the bowl game against TCU when he made some huge plays in the backfield. 13.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks. He was named the defensive lineman of the year in the Big Ten, the Thorpe finalist, and the defensive back of the year in the Big Ten. Of course, Darqueze Dennard, who can match up against just about anybody. So this is the matchup here when we talk about Brown and Smith and Wilson coming out of the backfield and off the line of scrimmage as wide receivers for the Buckeyes against Darqueze Dennard, the best in the biz in the Big Ten, especially Trae Wayans, who is an exceptional player. Kurtis Drummond, another Ohio native who wants to get back at Ohio. Isaiah Lewis. They've got exceptional depth and playmakers, and these guys are fighters. You don't think of that term necessarily in looking at defensive backs, but they will fight and press off the line of scrimmage. They look to win battles. They will not be manhandled by this Ohio State receiving core. So the Buckeyes their receivers will have to learn to fight their way off the line of scrimmage and gain separation. Okay, let's flip it across to the Ohio State defense, which this is a talented bunch, but they are lost right now. Michigan had a great game plan with Al Borges and utilizing the Michigan talent and Devin Gardner in particular in game planning against the Buckeyes. The Ohio State defense has exceptional talent when you look at Ryan Shazier, the best defensive player in the Big Ten, should have won the Player of the Year defensively over Borland of Wisconsin, but did not. 20.5 tackles for loss. CJ Barnett, one of the great safeties in college football. Bradley Roby had an off season, but a cover corner who will be a number 1 draft pick in the NFL. And then up front, Michael Bennett, who pushes the pocket on the pass rush and also is a run stuffer. The Buckeyes not bad against the run. Most of the problems on defense have been through the air against a league that doesn't have a whole lot of playmakers and deep threats throwing the football. So that's very alarming, especially if the Buckeyes get past Michigan State and take on Florida State. Noah Spence, one of the rising stars in the Big Ten, coming off the edge for the Buckeyes at defensive end. So exceptional talent. We know what the recruiting has been in 2 seasons under Urban Meyer and even before that under Jim Tressel. So the Buckeyes are not void of athleticism or speed on defense. They're just lost. They're missing tackles. They need to play with a chip on their shoulders, with tenacity, and Luke Fickell needs to put them in the right position. Okay, that Michigan State offense starts with Jeremy Langford at tailback. He ran for 1,200 yards, 16 touchdowns. It was a Michigan State running back by committee approach in spring camp and then going into the fall with Le'Veon Bell going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jeremy Langford separated himself, and that's what Mark D'Antonio has wanted from day one, a guy to separate himself as the back. He likes a workhorse, and Langford is getting the football close to 30 times a game down the stretch. Most consecutive 100-yard games in Michigan State history for Jeremy Langford. Not dynamic, though. He will not beat this Buckeye secondary to the end zone too many times in this game. Connor Cook, another Buckeye native. 17 touchdowns, 4 picks. Doesn't get nearly enough credit for the turnaround he's experienced and really the development, not necessarily a turnaround. He got his first significant playing time in the Buffalo Wild Wings bowl game against TCU last year, came in and led a game-winning field goal drive, and Connor Cook picked it up from there. Even though Maxwell got the game, the start in the opener, Connor Cook beat him out then. And again, 17 touchdowns, 4 picks. He must deliver in this one in the face of Joey Bosa, someone we didn't mention, but a pass rushing threat for the Buckeyes, the freshman, Bennett and Spence. The wide receivers for Michigan State, we beat them up all off season. They played much better here in 2013, especially the second half of the season. They got off to another rough start, dropping a lot of passes. Not spectacular. Benny Fowler caught 31 and 6 touchdowns. He's the number one deep threat and consistently makes the bigger plays than the other guys. McCarry Kings Jr., 34 receptions, 3 touchdowns. Tony Lippett, 35 catches, no TDs. A key in this game could be Michigan State tight end Josiah Price. Only 12 catches this year, but the Buckeyes, again, in focusing on the deep threats downfield, could lose Josiah Price, who's caught touchdowns the last 2 weeks in Michigan State wins. So that's the matchup as I see it. Michael Geiger, the kicker for Michigan State, is hit on 12 of 13. I believe that Michigan State, as I've seen it, is playing much better football during the second half of the season. The Buckeyes kind of stumbling home, and it was most indicative against Michigan, a team that they should have handled. But again, a rivalry game on the road, and if you match up the rosters, Michigan's got a ton of talent, which brings me to this analysis. Going into this homework here, Michigan State, Ohio State, the Spartans have been the chic pick. I've checked out internet sites and predictions, and the Spartans have been the chic pick. That point spread has gone from 6 to 5.5 to 5, and a lot of people like Michigan State to pull off the upset because of that defense and because the defense they didn't see with Ohio State taking on Michigan when the Buckeyes gave up 603 yards and 41 points. Okay, that Ohio State defense is not going to show up in Indianapolis. It's a much better defense than that. If you check out these rosters and where these kids came from, you've got 26 players from the state of Ohio in the Michigan State roster. Will that be an incentive? I don't think so. I don't think it should be. These two teams are playing for a Big Ten championship, and specifically Ohio State to get to a BCS national championship game, and Michigan State to its first Rose Bowl since 1988. What I'm getting at is the recruiting favors Ohio State significantly. Now, Michigan State has done well with less talent, but if you really go down the rosters and the 4- and 5-star recruits and where these guys were ranked coming out of high school, and I know that doesn't mean everything, especially when putting together a football team, but I think the talent is going to show in this game, top to bottom, all 3 phases of the game. Michigan State is one of the 10 best football teams in the country, but this Ohio State team is one of the very best football teams in the country, and especially when you separate the sheer talent and speed across the board, Ohio State's offensive line is going to do enough against the Michigan State defensive front. On the other side, I believe that the Buckeyes are going to be able to make some hay along the defensive front with Spence, with Bennett, with Bosa, against that Michigan State pass rush. The Buckeyes have struggled against mobile quarterbacks. Connor Cook is not that. He's going to have to stare down the gun barrel, and Noah Spence and Michael Bennett, specifically with the push up the middle at tackle, and going to have to deliver the football like he never has in his career. I went into this thinking, wow, this is going to be razor tight, but I like the Buckeyes to separate themselves in the fourth quarter. Ohio State 37, Michigan State 24 at the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis. Would love to hear what you have to say about this intriguing matchup for the Big Ten championship, Spartans and Buckeyes, right here on Mark Rogers TV.